As we welcome our friends from Caven Church in Bolton, we are not only welcoming a neighboring congregation, but the history of a worshiping people that spans over 200 years. The Presbyterian Church in eastern Albion Township began with meetings in the area around 1820, eventually settling in the Goodfellow family barn, located where the big Canadian Tire warehouse sits, at the corner of Healy Road and Coleraine Drive in what is now the Industrial Park on the west side of Bolton. There is a pioneer cemetery there still today. In the 1850s, a church building was erected on property secured from James Goodfellow in the same area. This served the congregation for nearly a quarter of a century before a decision was made to erect a new church building with adjoining manse in the town of Bolton proper. It opened on January 9, 1876, with opening services conducted by William Caven, principal of Knox College in Toronto. This was appropriate since the congregation had decided to name their church after Principal Caven. It was the first of two churches named in honor of the much-loved church leader, the other being in Exeter, Ontario, just 1 year later. Over time, Caven Church in Bolton was paired up with other congregations in the area sharing a minister. First, it was Knox Church Vaughan, which closed in 1961, but sat where a cemetery remains on the north side of Rutherford Road near the entrance to Highway 427. They remained a 2-point charge until 1901. After Caven parted ways with Vaughan, it was decided to plant a church in the village of Nashville, which opened in 1902. Some years later, they added a third point to the charge, which was St. Andrew's Church 10th Line, just north of the 15th Side Road in King. The 10th Line Church closed in 1952, while Nashville closed in 1998, leaving Bolton as a single-point charge once again. Caven grew in the post-war baby boom years and expanded their facility with a Christian education annex in 1963 that the congregation used until the amalgamation took place in April 2023. Why did the amalgamation happen? In the new millennium, Caven congregation had, for a variety of reasons, not kept up with the growth of the community, and financially they found it impossible to maintain their historic facility. The congregation decided a few years ago to sell the manse, which had been rented out for some time. However, the manse and the church were tied together on one lot, and severing the two properties would have been an additional expense that could not be borne. So in the end, the difficult decision was made to sell the entire property. Happily, Emmanuel Reformed Church of Nobleton, which had been meeting in rented facilities for many years, made a successful offer to purchase the Caven property, so it remains in use for the praise of God today. The hope was that the Caven congregation would use the money from the sale of the property to venture out in a new form of ministry, but the decision to sell the property had been harder on the congregation than anticipated, and those who remained with Caven were too few and too tired to take on what would essentially have been a start-up ministry. Rather than decide to close entirely, the session at Caven accepted advice from the presbytery to partner with a neighboring congregation, and St. Paul's was approached. The two sessions met together and prayerfully agreed to amalgamate the two churches, meeting in Nobleton and retaining the name St. Paul's. This was an appropriate choice, since after the close of the 10th Line Church in 1952 and before St. Paul's was begun in 1958, Presbyterians in the area typically traveled to Caven for worship. Among the families in this group were the Nattresses, who lived on the 10th concession, and later Bill and Thelma Cross, who were instrumental in the starting of St. Paul's. Thelma Cross was the organist at Caven for some years in this period. Caven has retained a number of historical artifacts from their history, and when amalgamation talks began, the elders expressed their desire for these artifacts to be displayed somewhere in St. Paul's. When our session next met in the Friendship Room, the pink room that was no longer pink, it was an easy decision for us to rename that oft-used meeting and fellowship space the Caven Room. And today, we are making that official. The comfortable space will now be known as the Caven Room, to honor those who labored for the ministry of the gospel in Bolton for over 200 years. Welcome, Caven friends, to your new home. You are now part of St. Paul's, and we are glad to have you as part of our family that encourages people to connect with God, grow in Christ, and serve in community.